Okay. Welcome everyone to the June 13th SSD board meeting. If we could rise and say the pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. All right, Amy, if we could have a roll call.
Director Asner?
Here.
Director Trujillo?
Here.
Director Faulkner?
Here. Did you hear me?
Yes, I heard you. Thank you.
Okay.
Director Moeller?
Here. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Vice President Byers?
Here, and I'm pulling in the parking lot, so see you in just a minute.
Thank you. And President Petra?
Here. Before we have no public comments, correct?
No.
No work session. Before we start a monthly SSD Board of Education work study, I would like to take a moment to remind the audience and the directors of the board on the work study process. The work study is a time to receive information from SSD leaders. We have 20 minutes. Actually, we're going to have about 45 minutes. Yeah. For the presentation, and 20 minutes for the board to ask questions. If in the event we are approaching the 20-minute marker, our goal is 5 minutes left. We ask that at that time the presenter finish up in the allotted time and the board director asking questions finalize their questions. This is in respect for all board directors of the SSD leadership staff. So first on our only thing on our agenda is the climate survey. So let's go ahead and get started with that.
And you guys will be able to pull it up in your board docs. They have a presentation, and then we also have additional information for everybody. Here. Good evening, President Patel, Director Jennifer Henry, Vice Director of Communications, and tonight I'm going to be presenting with my colleague, Dr. Macklin, Vice Director of DEIA, Jacita Moore, Chief Carson District Officer, and Wendy Pendergrass, Chief Academic Officer. We are going to be talking about SSD's employee engagement and climate survey data. So first, before we get started, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the survey. In years past, we used a different survey tool. This year, we moved to Panorama for Education to administer our survey. And with that platform, we are able to do more than just the 2 surveys that we were doing with our previous vendor. We can house all of our data and do unlimited surveys through this platform, which is one of the reasons that we moved that. So one of the things they recommended is that we had administered the employee survey in the spring and the fall so that we had comparable data within the same year. So this is the first time that we've had survey results that we can compare back to each other to develop actionable items within the same year. It helps us measure the level of our employees so we can address areas for improvement and other ways of gain increases. What it means to be engaged is that we look at a variety of drivers, including our mission and vision, leadership, school climate, feedback and recognition, work environment, feedback and coaching, professional learning, DEIA, communication, and well-being. And we look at those targets to see how our staff feel in relation to those, and then benchmarks or how we do the past. One important thing to note, though, is we will not be able to compare apples to apples with our data from previous years because we have changed vendors, and because of the platform that we use now, they have specific question sets that you have to use exactly their language and exactly their order to be able to get that national benchmark. So first, we're going to talk about survey participation. Overall, for our participation, we had 51% in the fall versus 45% in the spring for both staff groups. One small difference between this survey and previous surveys, we normally would survey for our teacher group, our para group, and then all other staff. The way it was broken out this year is we had our teachers and then everybody else. Through feedback throughout the year, we realized that's not going to be the best method going forward, so we're going to be making some changes to that for the new school year. But we did see great participation from our teachers, stronger participation in the fall versus the spring. We have talked about adjusting the time frame for both so that we can make sure that we're getting good participation from both sets so that we have reliable data. And then just, even though we're not comparing apples to apples, our past participation for teachers between 59 and 64%, our paras was 30 to 42%, and our other staff were 49 to 57. So we're still in the comparable range for teachers. Then just looking at engagement, just to level set what engagement looks like in other areas. So in SSD, our overall engagement from our teacher and our staff is 73%. When we look at other areas, 20% of employees globally are engaged, whereas U.S. employees nationwide, about 26%, and then school staff nationwide is about 39%. So we're doing a really good job of engaging with our staff, but we know that there's areas that we can still improve upon and even celebrate in other areas. And last year, our overall engagement score was 71% for all staff, so we are seeing an increase there too. Looking at our overall engagement from our teachers specifically, it stayed exactly the same from fall to spring. For our teachers, it's 68%. And then on those charts there, those 4 questions are where they're measuring that level of engagement. So the same question has appeared in other surveys that we've done. I'm proud to work for SSD. The second question is, employment with SSD gives me a feeling of accomplishment. The third is, I feel engaged in my work. And then the fourth one is, I'm included in decisions that impact. On the first 3 questions, we have really good results. And we're seeing that fourth question, a result of 39% favorable. So we need to do some work around that. But for the most part, we are pretty favorable. Last year, our overall engagement, again, not comparing apples to apples, but just for a frame of reference, we had 63% of our teachers reporting they felt engaged. Next, we're looking at our staff category, which again includes our paras and all other staff groups. In the fall, we had 74% report being engaged versus the spring, which was 78%. So we did see an increase there. And again, the same question. The first 3, we're seeing very favorable results, but still have a little bit of work to do on that fourth question when we're talking about being included in decisions that impact us. When we look at the engagement data overall from last year, because we had split into 2 groups, we had a favorable rating of overall 76 for paras and 71% for staff. So still in that range, but based on the data from this year, we're doing better.
So the next slide is a Wordle or word wall. And so what happens is as you take the surveys, you fill in one word, or 2 words to describe how you feel. So in the fall data, when you're looking at our teachers, you see some of the words such as passionate, proud, their work is important, their job, overwhelmed. Although some of those words are repeated, if you noticed, passionate, SSD, support, some of those jobs, the positive part of an engagement and the climate and culture are starting to get bigger, the words are starting to get bigger. Overwhelmed is on the spring again, but it's very small. So the feeling of being overwhelmed would note that it was decreasing. So that is one word answers that teachers would feel. On the next slide are the staff. And as Ms. Henry says, the staff would be our paraprofessionals, administrative assistants, other professionals that work in the district. And again, in the fall, similar words, proud, student-centered, children-centered, and in the fall, or in the spring, you see passionate. So the work that we're doing with the staff is working the more positive, the more language that supports what we're doing, and climate and culture are starting to become bigger. Slide.
So looking at the engagement areas, these four areas were our areas for growth. So when we're looking at feedback and coaching, school climate, professional learning, and school leadership. And just for a little bit of clarification, school climate talks a little bit more about how they feel about the district, whereas school leadership talks about the culture and their satisfaction in their district and school. So those four areas will be focus areas as we develop action plans for the next school year. We look at our areas to celebrate. We have staff leadership relationships, not to be confused with school leadership. Staff leadership talks about their relationship with their supervisor or their leaders in the building. And then we have DEIA, the work environment, and communication. So we'll continue to monitor those areas and see if there are other ways to improve those areas, but we'll again focus on those opportunities for growth for our action plan.
So good evening. Thank you. As we speak to really diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility, I want to point out that, of course, we see the number there, 79% of SSD and SAT embrace and value DEIA, but I think that's important because really understanding that this work, it requires empathy and vulnerability and also tough conversations and constant self-reflection with this work. And so to have 79 or 80% of individuals who feel like SSD embrace the work here is key. Just a couple of points to highlight here when we talk about the partner school districts and what that change has been as it relates to the fall. Almost 70% of 14 out of 20 districts increased as it relates to their thoughts and feelings as it relates to DEIA from the fall. And you can see there the percentage by the districts that increased and what that was, even though you may see districts who have a single-digit increase, that value and that work goes just as hand as a district that may have a double-digit increase because of the content that's being presented or the topics that's being chosen there. The next slide then again speaks to, as we talked to our teachers, and the last slide was staff and our teachers here, 13 out of 21, 62% felt that responded favorably to DEIA questions as it relates to the fall for the learning pieces. Again, you have a quote here which really summarizes some learning that took place at one of the partner school districts, which is pretty powerful about how the learning can impact an individual and to be able to change mindsets and really be able to, that persons feel like not only does the work, learning the work is empowerment, but that they can take that work and have an immediate impact in their classroom. That can relate to students, which is where you want to see. Also on the next slide there, just as you have a positive impact, on the next slide there, you have person's thoughts and views and feels as it relates to the work. And again, I started the conversation by saying that this process is only as good, the work is only as good as the commitment from the individual and the mindsets that it brings. And understanding that we're challenging those mindsets is key. And so these three powerful statements are statements that we're actually taking after learning or content that took place at a partner school district. As we continue to keep going, just a couple of pieces here now as we move to our SSD schools. And again, 85% of the SSD schools showed an increase here as it relates to responding favorably to DEIA questions from the fall, which is key in school staff. And then teachers 57% from the fall as it relates to the questions. I think also the question always comes about, well, Dr. Macker, when we break that down into a ethnic or racial makeup, what does that really look like? And you can see here that the increase in change that has taken place as it relates to our staff and the changes to the positive responses of DEIA items. And that's key because when you talk about our staff, as was mentioned earlier by Wendy Pendergrass and also Jennifer Henry, that our staff a lot of times are our most marginalized individuals. And so to see these numbers are a key piece. And then we have the breakdown here by our teachers, some pieces to celebrate, some pieces for improvement, and we will continue. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Dr. Moore for school and partner schools.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. To move to the next slide, it provides us with a teacher comparison. This is a heat map, and this heat map allows us to really take a quick glance across the entire county for each of the districts that we service, but also it allows us to really hone in on some of those specific areas that have been discussed. Many of them have been discussed as areas to celebrate, where also there are a few that have been identified as areas for us to maintain a focus. It is important for us to just take a look at a few key takeaways tonight, but we could look at this data for many, many hours, and we could receive many different reflections and prompt many questions. But I just want to give you a few highlights of information that we've identified as examples to share with you. If we take a look at specifically the staff results, when we look at that, first let me say to you that when we see blue, the darker the blue, that reflects above average, and the darker the orange, it reflects below average. So when we take a look at this, we can quickly identify those districts that are working above, those that are below, and those that we need to maintain focus on. I wanted to just share with you a few quick highlights if we were to look specifically at the staff and the fall to spring. The fall to spring, we would see that we would need to maintain a focus on communicating results. Many districts improved from spring to fall, where some of those districts remained the same and or they had a decline. The fall also showed more than 10 districts below average, and spring informed us that 6 districts were below, and there was an increase in the number of districts in some of those other areas. So basically what I'm trying to say is we can't really compare, if we're looking at it from a numerical standpoint of the number of areas to focus on from fall to spring. The categories may have changed as well as the districts. But if we look at that number overall, what does it tell us that we may still need to maintain a focus on, even if that information has changed from district to district and or from that specific category? Feedback and coaching, for example, as well as the work environment, there was a slight increase in below average from fall to spring. So we know that, again, those are some areas for us to maintain focus on. If we take a look at this information specifically from a staff perspective, Jennings would be one of those districts that we would highlight, where it had the most category results that were below average. There were 8 areas in the spring that we would look at if we were looking to move forward. There was a decrease in the number of areas below average. However, we still need to maintain that focus. Some of those categories did improve, where many of those areas, again, there were a decline. Afton is a district where we see it would be identified as a district above average in mostly all of the categories. And then if we were to look at Brentwood, that is at the bottom of the heat map, you would see that there is no data for spring staff results. And that would mean that we did not have enough respondents to provide us with that information. So I wanted to bring some of those key highlights to you. Additionally, when we look at the teacher component, it's key for us to still maintain focus, although we identified a few areas that are listed as areas to celebrate, such as the work environment and staff-leader relationships. When we look and drill down into this data, we identified that there are at least 6 districts the respondents may have been below average. And so just to ensure that we really dig down into this data, that we have those continued conversations with our leadership, our special education directors in each of our partner districts, so that this helps us to maintain focus on improving the climate and culture in the work that we do in each of the partner districts and throughout the county. This next slide just quickly provides you with a comparison from teachers as well as staff when we're looking at the spring results from fall results. Some of those districts that are excelling are identified here, and as again, looking at the heat map, these are the same color ranges that you would see there with the blue, but not with the average and room for growth. Those colors be a change here. So we have Afton, Bayless, Clayton, Hancock Place, and Maplewood. When we look at the district comparison, we see that they're excelling, and we know that from a perspective of looking in that mid-range of average, we have many of our partner districts to fall in that particular category. And then when we look at those districts to highlight for room and or opportunities to grow, it includes Lindbergh, Parkway, and Webster Grove. And there are many different factors for us to take into consideration when we are looking at this data. Of these districts, what are the number of new directors that are working and or additional leadership working in many of these districts? Did that impact any of these results with the shift in leadership? Were there any additional new initiatives or other changes that may have occurred in these districts? But it also informs us of the work to do to support many of our leaders in each of these districts with growing. The information that you have before you now is our easiest way to provide you with a snapshot of overall engagement when we're looking at 22 districts. And so here we're looking at both teachers as well as staff, and we're looking at fall compared to spring. When we look at the orange colors, that is where we're focused on teachers, and the blue would highlight our staff for fall and spring. Some of the highlights in this area include when we're looking at teachers in those dark blue colors. We have 15 districts that have shown an increase in overall engagement from fall to spring, where 3 districts declined, and that would be Jennings, Ladue, and Rittner. And we have 1 district that remained the same from fall to spring. When we look at the orange categories, this is information for our staff. And in this area, we have 14 districts that showed an increase where 2 remained, and that would be Pattonville and Webster Grove. And then we have 3 districts that declined. That would be Clayton, Riverview, and University. I will now pass the next slide to Ms. Spence.
So in the same format, we looked at the evaluations, the survey results for the schools. And again, we have Bridges that is excelling. The spring, to note, the teachers, there were not enough teachers to fill out the evaluation in the spring, thus they didn't have those scores broken out, but they are headed in the right direction. For the average or opportunities, you have our schools listed, moving growth, but still having some opportunities and excelling would be Litzinger, North Tech, South Tech, and Northview. And then, of course, those areas where we have seen some type of support or opportunity would be Southview, Ackerman, and Northview. Newer, my apologies. And again, we also have the same comparison, the overall engagement as you're looking. For both teachers, it's the yellow and orange when you look at yellow for fall and orange for spring. And then staff again, for fall, you have the light blue, and spring for the darker blue. And as you can see, there are some opportunities, and we'll use those focused areas with both our teaching and support staff in the school districts that were shared on the other slide. We have some opportunities also to increase the amount of staff that fill out this survey. We're still working very diligently to make sure that we have all voices heard. So we can have a very solid comparison and that they understand that this is how we hear from them. So next steps, what we plan to do is a few things. Our Leadership Institute that will be coming up in July will have our administrative staff very twofold. We have done a book study with the Chief Empathy Officer by Dr. H, I love to call him. What he is going to do is actually spend the morning with our staff, our administrative and leaders. In the afternoon, what we'll do, and some action planning when it comes around empathy, really what is empathy and how can we dive in and use empathy as a tool to increase our climate and culture results. But then also in the afternoon, we will be sharing the climate surveys with the administrative teams, and we will be also action planning based on the results that we have that we've shared with you today, going very deep into what areas and what specific opportunities they want to work on to build the climate and culture in their schools. We also have the DISPRO Summit.
And to add to the conversation for leadership, one of the other focus areas that we did have this current school year, working with each of the partner districts at the start of the year, we established goal meetings with each of the superintendents and leadership teams. A part of that conversation was for our directors to share with them the goals that have been established in the areas of focusing on engagement and the climate. And although the surveys have changed, the goals still remained a focus for this current year, with us now being able to have the fall and spring data now to help to inform us of establishing goals moving forward for each of these districts, and to ensure that we're also being transparent with each of our partner district leadership teams to see where we are, how our staff feel about working in those districts, but also to ensure that we capture their voice in helping to understand the expectations of us working together collectively. When we talk about the DISPRO Summit, we will be sharing some of this information when we have the DISPRO Summit, just as we will with the Leadership Institute. We want to continue to ensure that this data stays active, and it's not just a snapshot today that we're discussing, but how do we ensure that throughout the school year and moving forward, we continue to maintain a focus on providing our staff with the best climate and the best work settings.
So throughout the year, we've had our advisory committees, which Ms. Pendergrass will talk about in just a moment, but we received feedback through those advisory process committees that some of the questions they have been phrased in a way that were confusing or that they just didn't make sense, especially it was related to some of our related services and student services staff who are in more than one building or multiple districts. So we're looking at how we can simplify the survey to make sure that it is as understandable as possible for all of our employees. But one of the other things that we did, as I mentioned early on, is we utilized Panorama's survey questions in several of the areas. And so we did have the opportunity to customize those questions. It had to be exactly the wording, exactly the order that they have it, so that we get the benchmark data. Our feedback has shown that that caused some of the confusion that lent itself to it. So we're weighing whether or not the benchmark data is really necessary going forward. We have some of that now, so we can see where we rank nationally. But is that information really useful the way that we have it, or would it be better off going back to a more customized format so that we can have more actionable data? So over the summer, we'll be working on revising some of the questions and the wording that goes along with that. We also received feedback that our partner district superintendents would like to see how our staff feel about the leadership in their building, not our staff, but the leadership that are at the school level. So we'll be looking at adding some questions. And as I mentioned earlier, the way the survey was administered this year, we had it broken into two categories. We had teachers, and then we had all of the staff. Our para staff is such a large portion of our staff that it is important that we focus on them as an employee group as well. So we're going to make sure that we bring them back. So we'll have 3 sets of results going forward as we have.
Thank you. And finally, the employment advisory committees is something that we've done for the past several years. Some of you have been a part of it. There's an employee engagement committee that I do believe a board member sits on as well, and that Happens every 4 times a year. On slide 10, the opportunities for growth, feedback and coaching, school climate, school leadership, and professional learning. What that does is we take it to the groups, and the groups are broken down by paraprofessionals, teaching staff, related service, instructional administrators, operations staff, where they take these topics and we start asking questions. So what does it mean when we're providing feedback and coaching? What are we missing? How can we provide very poignant feedback and coaching? What does our staff want or consider feedback and coaching? So we will break these 4 areas down. We'll meet next year where all of the feedback is then given after those meetings to the employee engagement group where they discuss all the outcomes and possibly action plan if anything it.
So those 4 areas will be what we look at as district-wide areas for growth, but the schools and the partner districts will be looking deeper at their own data and looking at what specific areas they need to focus on. So it'll be kind of a 2-pronged approach. What is it that is specific to their school or even departments within the district, but then overall, how can we improve in those 4 areas? What questions do you have?
Okay. First, now that we have Panorama, do you like, I know you were gonna tweak it a little, do you like them? Do you wanna keep going forward with them, or like, oh, we should look at?
The platform is great. One of the things that is really nice is that we didn't have before is an electronic dashboard that all of our administrators can access so they can get their data into just a PDF report so they can sort and they can manipulate the data however they need to. So that right out the gate is very useful. We have unlimited surveys that we can do with them, so we can, any survey we want to do, they'll help us set it up and administer it. Whereas the previous vendor, we only got 2 surveys. It was a climate survey that we did for employees and a engagement survey that we did for employees. So now we are hosting all of the majority of our surveys. We're still transition some to the Panorama platform. So we're doing the employee engagement survey in the fall and the spring, along with our family. Sorry, I had to think of which one it was. Family survey. So in the past, we only did the family survey 1 time a year. So now we're able to do it twice a year. But we also have expanded it beyond just our SSD schools to our partner districts. And we're actually had a planning meeting today to talk a little bit more about how we're going to improve for next year. So I think it's just a matter of we've just started on the platform and we now know how we need to proceed. It's not a deficiency in the platform at all.
Ms. Pendergrass, you were just talking about slides 10 and 11. Can we go back to that? So if we explain one of the words we all know, but second coaching staff 40%. 40% what? 40% are positive, 40% like what do you mean by that?
Right, so the 40% is actually in the percentile that we have increased. So they answered that question favorably.
Ah.
And if you look at the slide too, on the very far right, you'll see a little triangle and a number. That's the percentage increase over the fall. I'm sorry, I didn't explain earlier that little orange dot. You'll see that on some of them, but not others. Those are the national benchmarks. So it's very tiny, but it says we compare in the 20th to the 39th percentile nationally in that area. And so some of the way the questions are structured also impacts how our staff, as in some other areas, answer the questions. But we did see growth in that area, and then underneath it you'll see there's a 0, so we stayed exactly the same from fall to spring. But most of the areas we saw some growth, if not about the same. And even in areas like in the bottom, under school leadership, it decreased, but it only went down 4%. So we're pretty steady with our results.
And actually, that was one of the areas that our engagement committees had talked about, because that question is confusing for some of our staff, because when you talk about school leadership, are you talking about the principals that are in my buildings? Are you talking about the coordinators that I work directly for? Are you talking about the directors? Are you talking about central office? So I think that's some of the feedback that we were able to provide to the engagement committee on things that we could get a little bit more specific and hope to see those results raised.
I forget where we go. So based on, it's somewhere in here. I usually don't hear it. The feedback you got in the survey, do you have then specific things that we can attack? Specific things like, ooh, this was nailing, this we want to replicate everywhere, and this is going so well, we want to help with that. Do we have specifics for that?
So one thing that I can speak to the principals and Chiquita can speak with the coordinators and directors is that on some of those slides, when you look at that heat map, you can actually click on some of those boxes and dive down deeper to see how staff answered particular questions anonymously. This is all anonymous, but what is the pattern or the phrasing, or what are the areas or what specific skills we are going to look at to help increase those areas. So that's one thing, as Ms. Henry was talking about that, or Jen, is that we can really use Panorama to drill down and get very, very specific per building for the SSD schools. What is a key area that they're going to look at or provide support for?
And then also to add to that, you know, what are those districts and or schools that are above average? What are some great things going on in those areas that we can learn and listen and share with some of our colleagues and peers working throughout the county and in our SSD schools?
All questions. So, I just have one.
Can I go through it really quick? Okay. It is anonymous and confidential, so it goes out to all of our staff members. It's a unique link, but we don't know who submits what. With Panorama, we can drill down to district and school, but if we have don't have above a certain threshold of staff within that school, we wouldn't see results for that school because it would be too identifiable. We have to have more than 5 or 6 to have results for that particular survey. If you have only 4 teachers, we're not going to get results for that school. We answered the survey and encourage people to take the survey because we need their feedback to be able to develop them.
I just have one question. On the slide 24, where you're showing where we're talking about the schools that have room for growth, I'm just looking at heat map. I'm just wondering why Whitner isn't one of the schools that needs growth. I have questions about the white boxes. What is the white boxes? So when we look at those lighter color boxes, that lets us know that they're in the mid-range. It's not to say that they don't need an area of focus. We identified that, and that was one of the key pieces that I pulled out and talked about through some of our recent conversations as well, too. So although we see those areas, we will see that in many areas. And we know that as we drill down to specific districts, we then will take a look at what the heat map reflects and continue to go deeper, looking at those specific questions and data points and having those conversations with the leadership in each of those partner districts to establish those.
And on the slide, it's an overall, so they're in the average category as a combination of the teacher and the staff results.
Correct.
When you're looking at the heat map, there, I think you can see
Staff.
Yeah, it's broken out.
Specifically just staff.
Mhm. So the lighter the colors, the closer to average they are. The darker the colors, the farther away from average. But that's just, the heat map is just to give you a snapshot. But again, the districts and the schools drill down deeper into their data, but it's just to give you an overview of what we're seeing at different levels by the
Yeah, and to, what you're seeing is the red is more, the orange was more with the staff part of it, where the other, the teaching staff was a little bit more.
I've got a question. to dovetail with what Tiffany just asked, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
In those districts that were where there's areas for growth or opportunity for improvement, and also in the heat map, can you kind of comment on what variables you suspect are at play there? What caused the backsliding from fall to spring?
First, the heat map is not a difference between, it does show both, but it's not a reflection of its backslide.
Correct. It could be the number of respondents, from one, term to the other, from fall to spring. And it could be a variety of other reasons, to even include the staff that may have participated in the fall, may not be the same in the spring. So we have to look at all of those particular variables when we're looking at this. But then again, I think we mentioned that as we look at this heat map, each of the areas that are reflected on here, we can go in and drill down and look at those specific questions for each of the districts and or schools. I mean, we can have this conversation forever and forever and forever, but we wanted to just kind of give this a good, easy snapshot of what was the easiest to share today, and for us to respond to any questions. Yes, sir.
Can you give a snapshot like this with the numbers? Would it be possible, if you, since we're making comparisons, would it be possible to tell me if these are significant, what level is significant? You know, we're comparing percentages, or we're saying it's a 0%, 6%. I don't know if that's significant. I don't know if there's noise in there, and whether that is whether that's a meaningful difference or not. And so
the platform does, it normalizes against a national average from all of the other surveys they've done with other districts, and they do have a minimum threshold of number of responses. Beyond that, we could probably find out.
I would like to know if the differences are significant.
Yeah, we could.
If not, you know, the numbers are nice, but they don't mean anything.
I mean, piggyback on that, so my request would be with this information as presented in the future, what I'd really like to get is information about the number of respondents as the actual number of respondents, and then in addition to that, what percentage of the potential respondents that represent. That would be very helpful to me in understanding some of these results. So for example, when I'm looking at the heat map, Afton looks like it's doing fantastic, but I can't tell if that's because 8 people answer. Again, I realize there's a threshold, or if it's because an abundance of potential respondents answered, and they really are doing. That makes it hard for me to compare. It's only 20 people, 8 people answered.
My problem with numbers is everybody looks at a number and thinks they know the meaning of it. But unless you find out if it's significant, you don't know the end.
Correct. Yeah, so if we had, 55 participants one year and 12 participants the other year, we might show an improvement, but that may not be a real improvement. It may have just been yeah.
And we do have that information by district what the respondents were, so we can get that to you. And then in here you have it broken down by question and the number of respondents in her area. So it shows you the number and the percent.
That's not per district though, so this,
No.
this data.
This is the summary of it, but we can get you that information about by the district.
Nice, objective was to give you an overview of the data, and before we release the individual reports to the districts and schools, so that information will be made public tomorrow. So we'll have that posted, and then we'll be able to share those results broken down by district.
So you would be able to get a standard deviation of what is correct.
Yep.
And from that, we could tell.
Yep.
That would be as important as this.
Another question was, we didn't get benchmarks from all of the data here, and I was kind of curious if there was reasons why I was missing it.
Sure. So areas where there are no benchmarks are customizable questions that we added. So we felt there were some questions we wanted to carry over from the previous survey. So those are questions we added, so there's nothing to benchmark again. with the questions that we utilized from Panorama, again, they had to be very specific in the set that they provided, in the order, exact wording, nothing customizable.
I think also understanding it, and back to Jen Henry's point, if you look on slide 20, understanding the number of respondents by the breakdown of the question provides you a pretty good avenue and street on what to walk down. So if you look at ethnicity and race on slide number 20, and you look at on Latinx, 41% change. In the fall, we know that that was less than 5% or less than 5 individuals accounted for that score compared to 10 in the spring. So that's a pretty clear breakdown where you're looking at ethnicity by race on the category on what road you're going down and where you need to be able to get there through the DEIA.
Also, one of the things we provided you was the overview of the detailed results for the teacher and the staff for the spring results. You should have got those with your packet this evening, and they were on board docs.
Yeah, 21, 22 for background questions broke down by district and how many respondents for both staff and teachers.
Any other questions?
Well, not trying to knock the stat on this, but the problem is you've got a 1 through 5 scale. No, that is not integral data. That's not rational data. It's ordinal data. So you can't really. I'd be real uncomfortable if somebody came up with. I was thinking about that. How am I getting a standard deviation when I don't have equal intervals between those? So we really can't do that mathematically. I know that there's other staff that use on there, but you're not going to be able to get a standard deviation because you don't have equal intervals between 1 through 5 questions. So I'm trying to figure out. I'll leave that to the statistician, but I'm curious to see how you're going to come up with it.
This is a nationally used program. So I think for multiple districts across the nation to use this, this is a standard for.
Oh, I'm not knocking that. I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
I just want to make sure that we're clear that this is not something we're manipulating. This is something that is a well-respected, utilized program that multiple districts in this county use. So we're actually able to use some of our information to help what they're doing. So I think when we're looking at, do we see an increase from last year, from the fall to the spring, that's where we're starting specifically. And I think that we need to, understand that going deep into this piece, you can go down a rabbit hole. This is a lot of information to be able to work through. There are favorable results. There are also areas that we know we need to improve on, and we are able to dissect those pieces and be able to drill down with each one of the directors and the principals in the school. So, yeah.
I'm not doubting that. I'm just saying, just because you're 1% or 2%, that may not be significant.
Right.
That's why I wanted to know. Tell me what's significant.
We'll reach out to Panorama's team. They're very helpful when we have additional information or data requests, so they can help us get that. Any other questions?
Okay. Do you guys have a motion for adjournment? Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.